What if the greatest celebration of human progress in history, a shining white city built to showcase the future, was hiding a dark, medieval secret? What if just blocks away from the magic and light of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, a different kind of marvel was being built? Not a palace of plaster and electricity, but a labyrinth of brick and shadows, a building designed not to be lived in, but to be died in. This is the story of a house built for murder, a modern-day castle with its own dungeon, and the charming, brilliant monster who designed it. This is the story of the house that eats its visitors. Welcome to TSF History. We uncover the most shocking, fascinating, and often darkest stories from our past. The events you're about to hear are all real, pieced together from historical records, trial transcripts, and eyewitness accounts. And if you're a fan of history that feels more like a thriller, you're in the right place. Before we step inside this house of horrors, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the shadows of history. Our story begins not with a house, but with the man. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett, but in 1886 he arrived in Chicago, a city rebuilding itself from a great fire, a city crackling with ambition and opportunity. And he arrived with a new name, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, H.H. Holmes. He was everything a 19th century man of success should be: handsome, well-dressed, intensely charming, and disturbingly intelligent. His eyes, a piercing blue, had an almost hypnotic effect on those he met. He was a con artist, a bigamist, and a fraud, but to the world he was a respectable doctor and a brilliant entrepreneur. He soon found work at a pharmacy in the Englewood neighborhood, owned by a woman named Elizabeth Holton. When her husband died, Holmes offered to buy the drugstore from the grieving widow. She agreed, and then she vanished. When people asked where Mrs. Holton had gone, Holmes would simply say she was visiting relatives in California. Nobody questioned it. With the pharmacy now his, Holmes purchased the empty lot across the street, and there he began to build his masterpiece. It was a massive three-story structure that would occupy an entire city block. Locals called it the Castle, a name that was both admiring and, in hindsight, terrifyingly accurate. The ground floor was respectable. It housed his new larger drugstore and various other shops. The upper two floors, however, were his private domain. He advertised them as a future hotel, perfectly timed to open for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. But the construction was strange. He hired and fired crews constantly. He would hire one team to build a section, inspect their work, fire them, and then hire a new team to alter it. He did this over and over, ensuring that no single worker, no single architect understood the building's true floor plan. Only he held the complete blueprint, and it was a blueprint for murder. The building was a labyrinth. On the inside, it was a disorienting nightmare. It contained over 100 rooms, many of them windowless. Stairways led to dead ends. Hallways turned back on themselves. Doors were installed that opened onto solid brick walls. Other doors, set in the floor, were hidden under rugs. But the most sinister features were hidden from all but Holmes himself. Many of the guest rooms were outfitted with secret gas pipes, connected to a control panel in Holmes' office. He could, at his leisure, fill a room with gas, rendering its occupant unconscious or dead. Other rooms were lined with asbestos and soundproofed, becoming suffocating, inescapable vaults. He could lock someone inside and listen, undisturbed, as they screamed for help until their breath ran out. And then there were the chutes, greased wooden chutes hidden behind wall panels that led from the upper floors directly down into the darkness of the basement. The basement was the building's stomach. It was here the house truly ate its visitors. Down here, police would later discover a scene from a medieval nightmare. There were surgical tables, a complete set of dissection tools and various vats of acid powerful enough to dissolve human flesh. There were pits of quicklime, a substance used to accelerate decomposition. And in the center of it all, a massive custom-built brick kiln, a crematorium hot enough to turn bone into fine white ash. Holmes, with his medical background, wasn't just a killer. He was a human recycler. He would strip the flesh from his victims, articulate their skeletons, and sell them to medical schools and universities. He was, in the most gruesome way possible, turning a profit on murder. In 1893, the world came to Chicago. The World's Fair, the White City, opened its gates. It was a beacon of progress, a fantasy land of electric lights, pristine lagoons, and the brand-new Ferris wheel. Over 27 million people flooded the city, all looking for wonder, entertainment, and a place to stay. Holmes's hotel, just a few miles from the fairgrounds, was open for business. His primary targets were young women, stenographers, teachers, and hopeful tourists who had come to the city seeking jobs or adventure. Many were drawn in by his charm, his promises of employment, or his proposals of marriage. Holmes was a serial polygamist, marrying multiple women without divorcing others, often for their money. He would woo them, convince them to take out large life insurance policies, which he would generously offer to pay for, and name him as the beneficiary. Once their financial worth was signed over, their rooms would be waiting. One of his employees was a woman named Julia Smythe. She was married, but her husband was abusive. Holmes, ever the savior, hired her and her young daughter, Pearl. Soon, Julia became Holmes' mistress. But on Christmas Eve of 1891, both Julia and Pearl disappeared. Holmes would later claim she had died during an abortion, an operation he himself was performing. Her skeleton, and likely Pearl's, was almost certainly sold for parts. Two more employees, sisters named Emmeline and Minnie Williams, were also lured into Holmes' web. He married Minnie, convincing her to transfer the deed to her valuable Texas property into his name. Soon after, both Minnie and Emmeline were gone. They had checked into the castle, but they had never checked out. When visitors at the hotel noticed the sisters were missing, Holmes would put on a show of concern before explaining they had decided to travel to Europe. The house kept its secrets.
For over 2 years, Holmes operated with complete impunity. The World's Fair provided the perfect cover. In a city teeming with millions of transients, people went missing all the time. The police were overworked, and Holmes was a respected, charming doctor. He moved through the White City like a predator, a dark shadow in the land of light, selecting his victims, luring them back to his castle, and feeding them to his house. But the devil, as they say, is in the details, and H. Holmes, for all his genius, was getting sloppy. He was, at his core, a con man, and it wasn't the murders that would bring him down. It was fraud. Holmes had a longtime business associate, a carpenter named Benjamin Pitezel. Pitezel was a rare creature, a man who knew Holmes was a criminal, but was too weak-willed or perhaps too greedy to escape his orbit. Together they hatched a new scam. Pitezel would fake his own death, taking out a $10,000 life insurance policy. Holmes would provide a look-alike corpse, Pitezel's wife would identify it, they would all split the money, and Pitezel would go into hiding. The plan worked, with one horrific modification. Holmes decided it was easier to simply kill Pitezel than to find a substitute body. He knocked Pitezel unconscious with chloroform and set him on fire, staging it to look like a lab accident. He then collected the insurance money, giving a small portion to the newly widowed Carrie Pitezel. But now Holmes had a new problem. Mrs. Pitezel and her 5 children. He couldn't risk them talking. He convinced the grieving widow that her husband was actually still alive and in hiding in London. He told her he would take 3 of her children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, to go and meet their father. What followed was a horrifying cross-country journey. Holmes, traveling with his own unsuspecting new wife and the 3 Peitzel children, crisscrossed the American Midwest and Canada. All the while, he was writing reassuring letters to Carrie Peitzel, forging notes from her children, telling her how happy they were. But the insurance company, however, was suspicious. The claim on Peitzel's life had been too quick, too neat. They hired a detective from the famed Pinkerton agency, a man named Frank Geyer. Geyer was a dogged, brilliant investigator. He wasn't looking for a serial killer. He was looking for an insurance cheat. His investigation led him to Holmes' trail. And as he followed the path of Holmes and the 3 missing children, a dreadful realization dawned on him. He wasn't just tracking a con man. He was tracking a monster. In Toronto, Geyer made his first grisly discovery. In the cellar of a house Holmes had rented, he found the decomposed bodies of 15-year-old Alice and 12-year-old Nellie, stuffed into a large trunk buried under the floorboards. The hunt continued, this time for 8-year-old Howard. Geyer tracked Holmes to a small cottage in Indianapolis. There, in the chimney, he found charred bone fragments and small teeth. Holmes had dissected the boy, burned his remains, and tossed what was left into the stove. The horrifying news exploded across the country. H. Holmes, the charming doctor, was arrested in Boston. With Holmes in custody, Chicago police, who had long dismissed missing persons reports from the Inglewood neighborhood, finally forced their way into the castle. What they found shocked the world. Newspapers called it the Murder Castle, a house of horrors. Reporters crawling through the labyrinth found the soundproof vault. They found the gas pipes. They found the trapdoors in the hidden passages. They found the chutes leading to the blood-soaked basement. They found the vats of acid, the surgical tables, and the terrifying kiln, which still contained human bone and bits of jewelry. They found a pile of women's clothing and heaps of hair. The building itself was an execution chamber. The trial of H. Holmes was a media circus. He was tried in Philadelphia, not for the dozens of murders in Chicago, but for the one he committed for profit, the murder of Benjamin Peitzel. Holmes, ever the performer, fired his lawyers and defended himself. He was charismatic, brilliant, and utterly devoid of empathy. He lied, he charmed, and he captivated the courtroom. It didn't work. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. While awaiting execution, Holmes sold his confession to the newspapers for thousands of dollars. In it, he claimed to have killed 27 people. But his story kept changing. At one point, he claimed he was innocent. At another, he said he was possessed by Satan. Later, he would write another, more lurid confession, claiming the true number was closer to 200. We will never know the real number. The World's Fair brought so many to Chicago who simply vanished. Holmes's methods were too efficient. The house had digested the evidence. The true number of victims eaten by the house could be 27 or it could be 200. He is, to this day, America's first and perhaps most terrifying serial killer. On May 7, 1896, Holmes was hanged. His last meal was boiled eggs, dry toast, and coffee. He remained calm, almost serene until the very end. He had one final strange request. He asked that his coffin be filled with cement and buried in an unmarked grave 10 feet deep. The man who had dissected, dismembered, and destroyed so many others was terrified that his own body would be stolen and dissected by scientists. As for the murder castle, it met a fitting end. Shortly after Holmes's execution, the building mysteriously caught fire. Some say it was an arson attack by angry locals who wanted the monument to evil destroyed. Others whisper it was something more supernatural. The building was gutted, but the brick shell remained, a charred skeleton, until it was finally torn down in 1938. Today, a United States post office stands on the site, its workers and customers likely unaware of the house of horrors that once stood beneath their feet. Holmes built a monument to his own evil, a machine designed to lure, trap, and destroy. He used the cover of progress, the promise of the future, to hide a darkness that was as old as time. He was a doctor, an entrepreneur, a husband, and a father. And he was a monster who built a house that ate its visitors. Thank you for joining us at TSF History for this disturbing look into one of America's darkest crimes. What part of the story do you find the most shocking? The house itself, or the calculating charm of H.H. Holmes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you found this video informative and engaging, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to TSF History and ring that bell. We have so many more stories to unearth. Until next time, stay curious.